Hello, everyone. Welcome to Decoding Downtowns, brought to you by Vistity. In this podcast, we dive deep with leaders from business improvement districts across the nation, revealing the strategies that are shaping the future of urban development and economic growth. Thanks for joining us. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jamie Schwartzman. Today, I'm really excited. We're going to be speaking with Downtown Fresno. Elliott Balch, he's the president and CEO of the Downtown Fresno Partnership in Fresno, California. And I'm a Californian down in Los Angeles. I always find Fresno an interesting place, gateway to the Sierras, on the way to Kings Canyon, Sequoia, Yosemite, and just an interesting place that has a lot of cultural diversity and a lot of agricultural background. So let's go ahead and let's meet Elliott, shall we? Elliott, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be with you.
It's really great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about downtown Fresno and what's going on there.
Well, your intro was right. Fresno is a really culturally diverse place. We have all of our different populations around our metro area, and downtown is a place that has a fascinating history kind of throughout the history of Fresno. So the founding moment was in 1871 when Leland Stanford actually sort of said there and established a train station.
Is this Stanford of Stanford?
Yeah, that's Stanford. And he made his money in the railroads. And so Fresno's origin is that depot, which was there to haul agricultural products that were just starting to be planted in the valley to market.
I see. So the rail came into Fresno, and this was a way to bring all of that agricultural out to the rest of the country.
Yep. And one of the interesting things that we're kind of left with today as a legacy in downtown is that rail depot was founded intentionally away from the river, because at that time the river was navigable, San Joaquin River, and he wanted to create an alternative way for folks to get their crops to market. So now, fast forward 150 years, and we're maybe a little bit unique in that there is a river that flows, but it's not through our downtown, not through the city.
I see. And is that river still navigable? Is it still used for shipping?
It's not navigable. It was dammed because it would flood often and reclaimed. And some of that water goes south in your direction.
Interesting. So what's happening in Fresno now? Tell us a little bit about the vibe there.
Well, Fresno is a city. So as we think about the remainder of the history that we were just starting to tell, generations of outward growth in our town, that this place has always been a growth fueled place from those early days of Leland Stanford all the way through post-war. And so that's been a challenge for downtown and even neighborhoods around downtown as investments fled the area. Sprawl. But what we're finding today is that there's a generation that's young people who don't necessarily, identify, haven't been part of that history necessarily, and really just enjoy that there's an urban place where you can have different things going on. And this is the center of a regional freeway network that best connects 1 million to 2 million people in the central San Joaquin Valley. So it's very exciting. As I've traveled to other cities, let's say in the Midwest, Rust Belt, kind of the complete opposite scenario, to have a generation, it's the youngest people that are the most excited about coming downtown.
Interesting. So let's just pivot for a minute. I want you to tell me a little bit about Downtown Fresno, Inc., because place management organizations are all so different. So how are you guys structured? How are you guys financed?
So under the hood, the 501c6 Downtown Association has existed since 1955, largely in response to some of the start of that sprawl era. I was part of, when I was in the city administration, the reimagining of the organization and the creation of a property-based bid. So our PBID has been adopted in 2010, renewed twice since, and is currently authorized through 2032. And that's the funding base for our organization, maybe $800,000 a year or so.
So it's all supplemental property tax assessment within your district.
Yeah, on a square foot basis.
And how big is the district?
352 properties, and so not quite a square mile.
Got it. And so tell me about you. What do you do every day, Elliott?
Well, we're kind of in a neat era as an organization. I think I was, as I mentioned, part of the creating of the organization, was part of a lot of the conversations with property owners back in 2009, 10, even before. I was the board chair in my 20s of the predecessor organization and kind of laid the groundwork. And so there's kind of a dual thing happening for us right now, which is that we're continuing, in fact, growing in the services, the programs that we're delivering using the dollars that are for the purpose from the PBID. So that's marketing and business development, clean and safe programs, events. And I get involved in ways in all of those things, but there's also folks on our team who are leading those efforts. The thing, though, to really understand is that we're in a moment as an organization, and I've been on for just under a year and a half now in this role, kind of coming back into the work full time, diving back into the organization, where alongside the services and the program delivery, we're also doing some big new things to really get involved in the real estate market and real estate and restructuring the real estate economy of our place, which is not something that we're exactly chartered or funded to do. But what we're finding is that there's a logic that to really recast the market economics of the real estate in our place, which I can describe kind of why and what that means, requires a collective effort, and that of anybody, we're the best positioned to be able to do that.
We'll get into that a little bit more in a moment, because I think what's going on in real estate, we're seeing it in all different districts. It's, one of the keys to success. But I want to know a little bit more about you. Like, why'd you get into this work? Why do you do what you do?
Well, I was born and raised in Fresno. And so I was born downtown. In fact, in your picture off your right shoulder is the hospital. So this is home for me. And I've left 3 times and always kind of gained a different perspective and learned some things. But every time I do that, I'm animated to come back and apply it in Fresno and help work on change in my hometown. And it's a place that has suffered from a lot of disinvestment, that has had some of the most entrenched, segregated, concentrated poverty of any large city in the country, and lots of environmental challenges in terms of our air quality, and just a lot of really remarkable needs. And also is the city that would be the 28th or would be the largest city in 28 states. So it's not a niche, boutique curiosity. It's a large American city.
About 500,000 people there?
Within the city proper, yeah. 1 million to 2 in the trade area. And so it's just a very meaningful experience to work on things that are about how do we change things. And the first way that happened when I went to college, I went to Boston. And so a place that's grown differently, right? And being in Cambridge, and a very walkable place, it kind of awakened me to, the life that I knew growing up of you just always kind of jump in your car and do everything isn't necessarily the way things always have to be in every city. And it's a result of community decisions that have been made, and that, people as a result are impacted differently. Not everyone has a car to just be able to jump into. And so it just really was an awakening for me. I ended up being a physics major because that was my kind of original trajectory. But by the end, I was really just so interested in how growth decisions affected community outcomes.
So let's talk a little bit about more of the organization, Downtown Fresno Inc., and kind of what role you play in economic development. We started talking a little bit about real estate. Let's kind of dive in.
Sure. So it's interesting, when we were working a lot with property owners in 2009 and 10, and I do take people back to some of those rooms and conversations. That was interesting because there were 2 conversations that happened during that time. One was, we'd love to increase the level of cleanliness, marketing, services. We'd like to fund that. What can we fund with the dollars we're willing to part with? What's the value of that for us? And then there was a parallel conversation about what could be possible if we had a way to organize property owners to convene for collaboration. And that was a little bit sort of off the balance sheet. That wouldn't show up in the financials exactly. The idea was more just that there was no way before our organization restructured, before we created the PBID, for property owners and business owners alongside, of course, to be collaborating. And so now I think, in my view, we're sort of making good on that part of the conversation, which is that nobody else is knowledgeable, has the relationships, understands the area, and is very focused in this area quite the way that we have the not only ability to be, but the mandate to be.
I see. So sort of leading a vision, is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
Like vision that people can participate in and contribute to?
One way to think about it is that if we are to develop our downtown, and by the way, we have along Fulton, which is just behind me in this photo, we have about 500,000 square feet of ground floor space. We have vacant land that under our zoning code's got to have more retail added to it. We want to have more housing built, and there's a whole bunch of things that are happening with the city and state funding for infrastructure to do that. If we want to see our downtown built out that way, but yet have as we do, as all of our downtowns do, multiple different owners, then there has to be some function of the developer function. It's different to be a property owner versus a developer, right? And oftentimes it's the same, but it's a different thought process, right? As versus one is how do I manage my property that I have versus another is this sort of change making, what's possible, what could the market support, how would I go about financing change, what are the dynamics that are going to affect the success of something that doesn't exist yet. So the developer function is not necessarily endemic or present in every single property's ownership. Not only that, but it turns out that if you're developing a retail center, and any retail developer would confirm this, you don't just have one conversation with one retailer, you're having a conversation with multiple, and they all care about who else is there. And so we've never really applied that insight, if you will, as a strategy. But what it means for us, when we have 65% vacancy along 500,000 square feet, we have 300,000 or 400,000 available vacant square feet of retail space. It's not like one space is going to get filled as a one-off. In fact, to say it kind of in the extreme opposite, it would be easier and will be easier to get 20 retailers to say they'd be the 20th out of 20 to fill these spaces, plural, than it would be to get one retailer to say they'd be the one. And so that kind of a vision, I mean, you said that word, and I think it's the development vision that needs to be carried somehow, but that goes beyond the four walls of any single property, right? So therefore, somebody that connects the different property owners has to be the one that is projecting that vision onto this place and these properties and collaboration. But that's
downtown Fresno, right? So
yeah,
that's Fresno Inc. is the one who's sort of leading the charge, telling the story, creating that vision.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that, about the retail. What you guys are seeing there right now. Are we seeing small indie guys come in, creative uses? Are we seeing more established major retail? What's kind of happening?
Yeah, so kind of something that I've been around downtown, off and on for 21 years, but still learning. And certainly over the last year, a couple of key insights. One, about what I was just saying, retail follows retail.
Yeah.
And two is just kind of the nature of interest in the spaces that we have. So we have spaces like this one over my shoulder, Chicken Shack. So that's a local chain. That's about the most branded that we have in terms of our retail. Spaces like this that are smaller and have a kitchen are going to be the ones that get calls because we have mom and pops that could take on that space that might be growing out of a home kitchen or vendor booth or a food truck. And so those are the spaces that get calls. They're financeable. What don't get calls ever are larger spaces, let's say over 6,000 square feet. And so, for example, just off the frame here in the other direction is the Bank of Italy building on the National Register that's been vacant since 1972. And so that's 10,000 square foot floor plate on the ground floor. So what we don't have are any national brands. And so that's a problem for our locals because there's not the automatic driver. And if you really think about it, and you can get kind of angry about it, as I do sometimes, thinking about, my God, we're expected to do the heavy lifting of the lack of those foot traffic drivers. It all falls back on us to market. So we've got a Instagram account that's got, almost 40,000 followers. We project and we promote stuff on that. That's what we have to do instead, or events that we do to draw foot traffic. And we love doing all those things, but it's not a substitute for having, anchor foot traffic drivers that might be retail or food and beverage or entertainment in some of these key spaces.
So, and tell me about what's happening in residential. Is there adaptive reuse going on in the area, and how, are you guys responding to residential demand?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's huge residential demand. It's interesting. We're, I guess, part of the California reality of real hot demand. And it's new for us because, as we were talking about with sprawl, we've always found a way to provide the supply that we've needed. But now what we find is that there's a demand for urban housing. Folks are really looking for smaller units. When there are smaller units, those are the ones that have the longest lines around the block to be occupied. So we do have a couple of adaptive reuse projects across the street behind me. You can't really see the building, but the Helm building is slated for 100 units of about 400 square feet. So
small studios.
As we've gone on, as I say, a small studio like that, you could rent out 10 times over. It's the 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom even that we've had that are slower to rent. But across the tracks in Chinatown, even farther behind me, recently our housing authority built a 57-unit project and had 4,000 applications.
Wow.
And so there's a huge demand. We have folks who are very vulnerable to eviction and all these challenges that come from having too tight a housing market. The thing that we also have happening now is that the state's committed, well, initially 93, ultimately $293 million toward infrastructure in our downtown. And that's water, sewer, 2 strategically placed parking garages so that we can free up land for more dense, new multifamily housing. So we've got a couple of key large sites, 5 to 10 acres, that are being developed by larger entities just within 3 blocks of this photo where I'm sitting.
Oh, and are those projects, have they broken ground yet?
They've not broken ground. They're in the financing stages, planning and financing stages.
Okay, got it. And then for other developers that may be watching this, are there still other infill opportunities? And, is
Absolutely.
downtown Fresno, are there any interesting buys there?
Absolutely. No, it's bananas. We have a pawn shop, a street in front of me, I guess you'd say, that's just been selling the building for $2.5 million. It's got a lot of retail space. It's got a garage. It's basically a built podium that could be, engineering wise, is ready to build way up. And so that is just like very well suited for somebody creative.
About how many units could a property like that?
I mean, the zoning allows up to 15 stories. So you could do, 100 plus units.
Interesting. Great. Oh, let's pivot a little bit back into economic development. And I want to, talk about data and what you guys are tracking. So what data are you tracking, and what of that data do you find are people most interested in?
Yeah, we're still in our first year of using Placer. So we're interested in questions of, who's coming. Been interesting to see some insights on dwell times. How long are folks staying? And, it's been a little bit, I don't know, more transactional than strategic probably, where we're looking at what was the turnout at, our Christmas parade, or what at this festival or that event, and how long do people stay, and how does that compare to other events in the region, so to give people some sense. If they're not part of the market, like our Fiestas Patrias, the Mexican Independence Day, if they didn't go, they don't have a sense for how packed it was and how long people were staying and dancing and eating it. So the data helps tell the story across those sort of cultural barriers, let's say. And then we're interested in, what our office population's been. COVID didn't affect us as much, but that's kind of because we didn't have huge corporate offices, to be emptied out. But it's been helpful to get a rough census since the pandemic of folks who are coming for work. And then we're kind of initially, and a little bit, this is more a directional North Star, but it's like kind of recentering some of the conversation in the region and among our community partners about downtown is one of the places that is relevant in the tourism to this region. So not only is it the crossroads where you decide if you're going to Kings Canyon or to Yosemite or farther north, south, but also just any morning I can drive around and there's always people that seem a little too fit to be Americans at their age. And if you get close enough, or speaking a different language. So downtowns are just naturally where, all of us, even Fresnans, when we're traveling, go to assume that something's worth finding there. And so people are showing up in downtown that way. I was just having lunch with the director of the zoo, which is a great zoo and an attraction. And we were really hitting on the fact that people decide to visit a place, not just for one reason, but when there's multiple reasons, it could really drive visitation. So think about a visit to San Diego as a family, and the zoo is part of your thinking about that, but you're also going because you know that you're going to find something interesting in the Gaslamp corridor, or maybe you're going to go look at the Midway Museum, or there's so many different things in San Diego, right? So we were talking about, downtown is another one of those places, and we all kind of rise together.
Are you guys producing any kind of reports, economic data reports that you distribute at this time?
Well, so we're just about to get under contract with the retail project, which I didn't fully describe, but we're putting a consultant and broker team under retainer. And it's actually a 6-year contract where, as we are able to see places leased out or sold or whatever, there's a finder's fee because we're facilitating this kind of work to be able to happen. We're not involved in the deals, but we are playing an introductory role, and we're kind of making that possible through this retainer contract. So part of the work of that project will be to really create marketing materials for downtown as a retail and mixed-use center and develop a bench, maybe 3 or 4 deep for each property of ideal tenants that could be part of this as we go, as our team goes. We have a really top-notch retail developer with a lot of relationships in the industry to kind of cast this vision with tenants across the country. So it's a pretty exciting new thing that we think is there's a demand for in the market, our local market. So that's really where we're going to focus our attention in terms of selling, using data to sell what's here. That's the market that we need to be selling to.
Got it. When does that project start to kick off?
Well, I'm taking it to my board in 2 days for final. It's been at the board 2-3 times now, but final approval on a very significant contract, and then with a go live on July 1st.
Hey, let's talk about that for a minute. Your relationship with the board, and just giving some insights to other leaders in place management organizations and what that relationship with the board is like.
Yeah, so interesting. Like, I don't know how universal any of this is, but our organization, I was involved before the organization in its current form existed. I was intimately involved with creating it. I took 10 items to the city council during the course of creating this thing. So I'm intimately, I wrote the bylaws. Like, I'm very involved from a long time ago and have accomplished some big things in other roles for downtown, creating the organization for one, and also our Main Street reconstruction using a significant federal grant that came in, and that happened in 2016-17, like a huge multi-generational project in the making. So me coming in and having started working on downtown stuff 21 years ago, there's just a lot of familiarity. I would even say deference. I mean, I've had a couple of board members say, we don't need to have a lot of strategic conversations at the board meeting. We hired you to be the expert. We know you know what to do. Just tell us what we need to do. And so that, as a board leader in other organizations, that is not the kind of board culture that I favor. I do not think that that's the best way for a board to support an executive or a team through a really significant change and growth process. So I push back on that a little bit, but underlying it is a really, lovely intention of being supportive, of deferring to my management. But communications just is really important. So, for example, in scoping this retail project, some board, some non-board, but involve the largest property owners, because there is no project if the individual properties aren't put into play as part of the strategy. And so it would be irresponsible to recommend spending all this money on a retainer if the individual property owners weren't going to be interested in participating. But involve them, ground truthed it, and got a really positive, strong response. But I'm the first local permanent hire for this position since 2010. So there's been a lot of hires of folks, and with all different backgrounds and skill sets, and some really great folks I've gotten to know in my other roles that I might have been playing during the time in this job, typically with maybe some background in place management or in other IDA member circles or whatnot. But I'm just a little bit different because I kind of it's a local thing for me.
So I guess looking ahead then, if we look at the next 1 year, it's a focus on activate retail, get some of that vacant space absorbed, begin to program. Is that kind of where your head's at?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's the retail challenge is actually 2 challenges. So one is our current vacancies, which are north of 300,000 square feet in a concentrated area. So it looks like new shopping center development or redevelopment. The other is that we've got this major city and state focus on housing production with the infrastructure investment that the state's making, and a lot of attention that the mayor's administration is putting on housing, and all for great reasons. They're intertwined. This retail and the housing are intertwined because under our zoning code, you have to build ground floor retail so we don't have dead sidewalks. But if you do the math, every new block of housing requires 34,000 more square feet of retail. And so either you're faced with a vacancy in that, adding to our denominator of the vacancy rate, or it stays vacant, and that's $1 million in rent a year whole in your pro forma, which may very materially limit your ability to build the housing. And so we're in a lot of conversation with the city about the project, with developers about the project. There's a lot of coming together around both, kind of redevelopment and then new development.
Any interesting, strategies you're working at, with doing pop-ups, or doing other ways to activate spaces, art uses, etc.
Yeah. No, we love on our downtown as it is, even as we're in all of this change process. So, for example, one of the things that would be unbelievable 10 years ago is that Fulton Street, right behind me in the photo again, every first Thursday downtown, we have Art Hop, which has existed since the 90s. Historically, 0 people along the Fulton Mall when it was a pedestrian mall. Nowadays, 15,000 people jammed. And I think that's kind of an example behind me of some of the booths, but truly from the data that we have, 15,000 people. And so we're proposing some ways that we can provide some structure to that, do some more engagement and activation of buildings to include art as part of this event, which is a very kind of hurly-burly commercial thing. We're also proposing to grow the different kind of cultural festivals that we offer, because we do find that those are big sales days for some of our merchants, and because this is a cultural landscape. This is a place that multiple cultures in our region consider their own and our home. And so we want to lift that up and celebrate that.
Interesting. Well, I think your local perspective on it really is going to inform things in a way that is going to be unique and probably more relevant, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I've even had this conversation with other, let's say, leaders or other, let's say, even board leaders trying to recruit executives for other organizations, institutions locally. It's like, we can get good talent to come here if the pay is enough. We've kind of been through that a lot as a community, but inevitably, well, either somebody's kind of mediocre and this is not our organization, but just a general statement, and so they stay a while, or they're really an up and comer and they're on their way up and they stay maybe 2 years. And so the challenge that kind of creates for the sort of work that I've been describing is it doesn't lead to the kind of solutions that I'm talking about, right?
Right. Well, it takes a lot of time. These are not projects that happen one quarter at a time.
The benefit of the doubt from a relationship to be doing something big is indispensable. Totally. I mean, I know everybody and I can just call them, right? And they'll pick up the call and they want to talk. And then the embarking on a 6-year contract, because this thing's going to have a life cycle that's not going to be done in a year or 2. And so having the credibility that, yeah, I'm still going to be engaged in 6 years, is essential. Like, there is no development project without that. And so it's interesting to kind of think about sometimes. I have thought about sometimes, like, how would I expect somebody coming into this market to get to the place where they've connected these dots? It would take years. I mean, it's taken years for me, and I'm 21 years in and I've still been learning in the last year, right?
Well, I guess, placemaking, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Right.
So it's about finding that pace and, making continued progress.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
So let's play a little game here. It's our make-believe game, and I'm going to hand you a magic wand, give you the power to cast a spell and do whatever you would like to promote the vitality of downtown Fresno. How would you use your magic wand?
Oh gosh. Well, so we've got some really great spaces where some totally unique retail and entertainment tenants belong. So, I mean, that's, and we're trying to, I wish I had a magic wand, but instead we're using other means. But honestly, just that's what people want from downtown. And in a market of 2 million people, that's the thing. And so I think a more active street life and active ground floor uses totally drives the pro formas, the ability to develop the housing that people also very much demand, but just really makes downtown like this great destination.
I see. And so if you think about those types of retail uses, what do you think is going to be the most attractive? Is it going to be big national brands with names I know, or do you think it's going to be more local concepts, more artisanal, more local? What's your feeling on that?
It's going to be a mix. The healthy answer will be that it's a mix. And what we have currently is not healthy, because we have local and we have artisanal, but we don't have branded that drive stronger foot traffic or our larger formats. So
a city Target.
Yeah, sure. Yep. Or a nice grocery, maybe a small format, of course, but right. Or even entertainment, small format indoor aquarium concept, or things that are really outside the box, unique in the region. Another thing that we don't have in the region, remarkably, given our socioeconomics, demographics, so forth, is we don't have an outlet center. So we've got all kinds of demand for outlet. We can see how many people are going to outlet centers that are 100 plus miles away, but it's an unmet need in the region. So these are our kinds of opportunities, but not to the exclusion of maintaining what we love, which is we love to have a mix of our local merchants as well.
So wave the wand, we have less vacancy in retail.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Elliott, before we wrap up, why don't you tell the folks who are listening how they can keep an eye on downtown Fresno, how they can find out more about what you're doing and more about you?
Yeah, my team has assembled one of the best websites I know in the industry with so much information at downtownfresno.org. You've got all our events there. You've got office and retail lease listings. You've got all kinds of history and interesting stuff. So
very excited to see how everything unfolds for you. And I think I'll have to make a trip up there and hang out and sort of check out Fulton Street.
Yeah, let me know when you do.
Sounds good. Elliott, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you sharing these insights, your perspective on downtown Fresno, and just very excited to see where things head for you guys. And to our listeners, I'd just like to say thank you again for tuning in. Also like to thank Vistity, who's sponsoring us, and for all the good work that they're doing to help promote economic development in districts like downtown Fresno and all over the country. Elliott, have a great afternoon. Looking forward to speaking to you again soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Jamie. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us today for Decoding Downtowns. If you've enjoyed our podcast, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's brought to you by Vistity, the leading geospatial visualization platform for data-driven decisions. Stay connected, stay informed, and let's continue to shape the future of our cities together. Until next time, I'm Jamie Schwartzman.